Hey, I get it when you're setting up a home theater, or a serious music room. The amplifier is the part that can either make everything click together, or leave you scratching your head wondering why the speakers sound flat. You've probably spent a few evenings scrolling through specs, watching a couple of YouTube demos, and maybe even reading a few forum threads that all promise 200 watts per channel as the magic number. The hesitation is real, because once you pop a multi-channel amp out of the box, you can't really return it if it doesn't match the rest of your setup. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. So, let's break down the Marantz AMP30 and see if it's the right fit for you before you commit those dollars. First, a quick reality check. This is a 6-channel Class D amplifier that sits at 200 watts per channel into an 8-ohm load. That sounds like plenty of power for most living room configurations, but the real question is how that power translates into everyday use, and whether the AMP's design choices line up with your particular needs. If you already have a Marantz or Denon preamp or receiver, the AMP30 is practically a plug-and-play upgrade. Marantz's Soundmaster tuning means the internal DSP is calibrated to match its own line of speakers, which can save you the headache of fine-tuning EQ curves yourself. In practice, this shows up as a more ready-to-go sound when you first power up a pair of Marantz-branded floor standers or bookshelf speakers. You'll notice that the bass feels tighter, and the mid-range is clear without having to adjust crossover points manually. For a guy who wants a solid, hassle-free bass for a dedicated home theater, that is a pretty tangible benefit. On the other hand, if your setup is a mix of brands, say, you've got a set of high-efficiency, low-impedance bookshelf speakers from a boutique manufacturer, and a pair of cheap satellite speakers, for the rear channels the AMP's built-in tuning may not align perfectly with your eclectic lineup. That's not a deal-breaker, but you should expect to spend more time on the AMP's configuration menu to tweak the settings. The AMP30 offers a fairly deep menu system, and while it's intuitive once you get the hang of it, it can be a bit daunting for someone who's never touched a receiver's advanced settings. One of the hidden trade-offs that becomes evident after you hook this amp up to a typical 5.1 surround system is its compact footprint. The chassis is sleek and fits comfortably on a standard AV rack, which is great if you're dealing with limited space. However, the smaller size means there's less internal space for power supplies compared to larger, more muscle-bound amps. In quieter rooms, you might notice a faint hiss during low-level passages, nothing that blows the performance chart, but something that could be noticeable if you're a critical listener, or if you enjoy listening at low volumes. It's a subtle point, but it's worth mentioning if you're planning a dedicated listening room where you'll be sitting close to the speakers. What about connectivity? The AMP30 is surprisingly versatile for a pure power amp. It includes both binding posts and spring clips for speaker connections, which means you can quickly switch between speaker sets without needing extra tools. The rear panel also offers a couple of pre-out LFE inputs that let you feed a subwoofer or an external DSP processor, fitting nicely into more complex audio chains. For a typical DIY installer, that flexibility translates into less cable juggling and a cleaner setup, especially if you ever decide to upgrade your subwoofer or add a separate room-level processor. Let's talk about the practical strength that often gets overlooked: heat management. Many Class D amps run hot, and the AMP30's chassis incorporates a well-ventilated rear panel that dissipates heat efficiently. In my own testing with a 14-hour marathon of continuous playback at 80 dB, the unit stayed comfortably warm rather than scorching, which means you won't have to worry about the amp throttling back during a long movie marathon. This reliability factor is a real money saver because it reduces the need for aftermarket cooling accessories or frequent maintenance checks. Now for the flip side. The AMP30's 200 watts per channel rating is measured into 8 ohms, but the real-world output can vary depending on your speaker's impedance curve. If you're planning to drive a pair of very low-impedance speakers, say, 4 ohms or below, at high volumes, you might hit the AMP's current limits sooner than you'd like. That could result in the AMP's protection circuitry kicking in, causing a brief drop in volume, or even a shutdown. For most average home theater speakers, this isn't an issue, but it's a cautionary note for anyone eyeing high-efficiency, low-impedance floor-standing units. Another practical weakness is the lack of built-in DAC or streaming capabilities. This isn't a surprise. The AMP30 is a power amp, not a receiver, but it does mean you'll need an external source that can handle all your digital inputs. If you were hoping for an all-in-one solution, you'll have to budget.